Today's lecture covers Module 6 in your book. The focus of this lecture is to discuss how energy can be converted from one form to another, and we will be looking at several topics. So at the beginning of all of the PowerPoints that I'll be sharing with you, because these will be posted to Thrivist as well, it'll have the topic and then what you should know and understand by the time the lecture is over and we've done some activities in class. One of the things we will be talking about through this module and then in class as well is primary productivity, which describes the rate at which sunlight is converted into organic compounds. We will also be looking at trophic levels, so how energy is flowing from producers all the way on up to consumers. The 10% rule, which describes how much energy is moving from one trophic level to the next. And everyone's favorite, food chains and food webs. A lot of what we will be discussing here, I hope you remember from Bio 1, but if you don't, that's okay. I won't be upset. First, let's talk about ecosystems. All ecosystems have their, general characteristics, but one of the things is that their boundaries are not clearly defined. So we can't say, within this square mile is where this ecosystem is. It doesn't really work like that unless we're talking about a cave or something. The biotic and abiotic components are what define an ecosystem. So what living and non-living things are found there. What we need to review before we can really talk about ecosystem productivity and things like that is processes that move energy and matter within an ecosystem. So first, let's talk about energy flow. We have autotrophs, which is our fancy word for producers, like plants and other photosynthetic organisms, and absorb energy from our sun. And then that energy is transferred from the autotroph to the heterotroph or consumers when they are eaten. And then energy can also be transferred from heterotroph to heterotroph, but this energy transfer is not as efficient, as we will see later. So let's review photosynthesis and respiration. During photosynthesis, autotrophs convert energy from our sun into a usable form. So they'll take in light energy, carbon dioxide, and water to make oxygen gas and glucose. Some of that oxygen will be released back into the atmosphere, but some will stay with the autotroph for respiration. And then that glucose will be stored and used in the plant. So maybe it's going to combine a bunch of glucoses together to make a cell wall or something. And then that glucose can be transferred to heterotrophs when it eats an autotroph. Sort of the opposite thing happens with respiration. So one thing that you definitely need to remember is that both autotrophs and heterotrophs will do this process. So they will use oxygen and glucose to make carbon dioxide, water, and energy, as we can see in this diagram here. But, the big thing is just don't forget that autotrophs are able to do respiration as well. So the energy that is captured by producers moves through many trophic levels. A trophic level is simply the successive level of organisms that are consuming each other. So in the first trophic level is where the autotrophs are. The next trophic level is where herbivores, or we can also call them primary consumers, are. The third is carnivores or secondary consumers. And the fourth level is also carnivores, but we can also call them tertiary consumers. We rarely see a fifth or higher trophic level because of how much energy is lost through the consumption from trophic level 1 all the way up to 4. It's generally going to be more efficient to be in the second or third trophic level, even for humans. So I hope you enjoy eating your vegetables. A food chain is just the sequence of consumption from autotroph to wherever the end is. And then the food web is a bunch of food chains in an area put together. Lots of organisms can be happy at more than one trophic level, and we call them omnivores. My hope is that you are an omnivore and like to eat producers as well as other consumers. If you choose not to eat other consumers, that's cool too. Each trophic level eventually produces some dead organic matter that will be later consumed by other organisms, but these will not be shown in the food chain. So what we're talking about here are scavengers, detritivores, and decomposers. So scavengers, I'm sure we can all think of several, will just eat dead animals straight up. Detritivores will start breaking down the dead tissue and waste into smaller particles. And then our decomposer friends, like fungi and bacteria, will convert the organic matter into smaller elements that can be recycled back into the ecosystem. And we will look at that in some more detail when we talk about how things like nitrogen and phosphorus move through the ecosystem. Let me move myself over here so we can look at this incredible diagram. Over here, we have an example of a terrestrial food chain. So we have our autotroph, grass, gets eaten by the zebra, which gets eaten by the lion. The arrows here show the movement of energy. So we have energy from here moving to the zebra and then from the zebra to the lion. There's also an aquatic food chain example. We have our algae friends that are eaten by zooplankton, which are later eaten by fish, and then a bald eagle, for an example. Maybe it's just eaten by a bigger fish and it all stays in the aquatic ecosystem, but that's fine. There are, lots of interactions between terrestrial and aquatic organisms there. And here is an example of a food web. I like this because you can see there's a colored dot by each organism that lets you know what trophic level it fits in. As we can see, things like the lion and the hyena can be happy at more than one trophic level. So the hyenas are both primary and secondary consumers depending on where we're looking at, which food chain we're looking at. So if the hyena is eating grass, for example, that would make it a primary consumer, but they also like to eat that dead wildebeest. So, you gotta eat what makes you happy, I guess. Moving on, what we know is that some ecosystems are more productive than others. So when we're talking about the productivity of an ecosystem, we're looking at the amount of available energy, which will determine how much life it can support. So we measure that by looking at two different things. Gross primary productivity, or GPP, is the total amount of solar energy that autotrophs capture in an ecosystem via photosynthesis. What's more important, I would argue, is the net primary productivity, or NPP, which is the energy captured by the producers minus the energy producers' respiration. So if we look at this lovely image from your textbook here, 90% of solar energy is reflected or passes through producers without being absorbed. That seems crazy. Oh, I think I said 90, 99. But then 1% will be used by producers during photosynthesis. Of that 1% of solar energy, 40% of the GPP is lost to respiration, and whatever's left, that other about 40%, supports growth and reproduction of producers. So we only have plants absorbing 1% of the total solar energy that hits the earth. 60% of the 1% is lost to respiration, and the 40% that is left is called NPP. In class, we will be doing an activity with this, looking at aquatic NPP and GPP, and we get to do some super fun math that I know you're all very excited about. So, how do we calculate productivity? The NPP, or net primary productivity, is simply GPP minus respiration. We will generally express GPP and NPP in terms of kilograms of carbon taken up per square meter per day or year. In symbols, kg, no, there's a space there, so kilograms of carbon per meter square per day, or you can do it per year. So this leaves us to, a lovely little math opportunity. Let's suppose that a forest in North America has a GPP of 2.3 kilograms of carbon per meter square per year and loses 1.2 kilograms of carbon per meter square per year to respiration. What is the NPP? Oh boy. Stay tuned. I don't want a laser pointer. Okay. Heads up, this is my first time using the marker on this thing, so my handwriting is not this terrible. Whatever. Okay. So our NPP here's what we know. Our NPP is going to be the GPP, which I can see here is 2.3. Please forgive me for not writing the units because this is taking forever. Minus 1.2, which will be 1.1. And then please in class write your units or we'll have a problem. So our NPP is going to be 1.1 kilograms per kilograms of carbon per meter square per year. And when we do the calculation, we generally see it actually is about 40% of the GPP. All right. Oh my gosh, you guys, I did it. Oh, I don't want that anymore. Okay. Whew, that made me a little flustered. I don't like figuring out new things. Anyway, well, the other thing we know is that some ecosystems are going to be more productive than others. What I hope you notice is that changes as we get more north or more south of the equator. So the most productive ecosystem ever are going to be our swamps and marshes. We will be looking at terrestrial and aquatic biomes relatively shortly. So we'll come back to this as well. If we're talking about terrestrial ecosystems, no shocker there, tropical rainforest is going to be the most productive. Downside here is we're having a large decrease in terrestrial ecosystems, so that's not fun. NPP establishes the rate at which biomass is produced over a given period of time. So when we use the term biomass, we're talking about the total mass of living matter in an area. And then standing crop is the amount of biomass present at a particular time. So we say like right now, today, this is how much is there. That's going to be standing crop. But if we're looking at over, a general period of time, we're going to be talking about biomass there. Another issue is that not all energy in a trophic level is in a usable form. For example, some parts of plants are not digestible and are just excreted by primary consumers. Don't want to be gross here, but humans cannot digest cellulose. I'm just going to say think about corn and you'll know exactly what I mean. So let's look at what happens to digestible food, not the non-digestible stuff that just comes right back out. Some of that energy will be used to power daily activities. So all organisms need to move, eat, maintain their body temperature, whatever. So that energy that's used to power daily activities will be lost as heat. The leftover energy is converted into consumer biomass and will be available for consumption at the next trophic level. So whatever eats that thing. So if we're talking about a cow or a chicken, for example, that leftover energy will be available to you if you are choosing to eat cows and chicken. What we, and by we I mean scientists, have figured out is that the ecological efficiency, or the proportion of consumed energy that's passed on from one trophic level to the next, is fairly low. So when you eat something, you're only getting about 10% of that, which leads us into our rule of 10%. And this is why we will rarely see a fifth or higher trophic level, because there's too much loss. So if the primary consumer has 10% of the original energy, secondary consumer is only going to have 1, and then we have 0.1, and so on. And so there's just so little energy left that it is not efficient to eat at those higher trophic levels. The most efficient is to eat at a lower trophic level as possible, which for most organisms will be eating producers, but not all. There are for sure some actual carnivores out there. And so here is an example that I think makes it a little more easier to see, is we can look at trophic levels through a pyramid shape. And this is ideal because we know that the amount of energy or biomass, etc., is going to decrease from one trophic level to the next. So let's say producers have 10,000 J of energy, zebras or primary consumers will only have 1,000, and then the secondary only has 100. So if something were to eat that lion, it would only be getting 10. But this is a great way to show trophic levels because of that decrease. And that is it for today. Again, we will be looking at examples of food chains, food webs, trophic levels, and productivity in class.